Hey guys, welcome to Module 2. We are getting into really thinking about this idea of a framework and how we talk about specifically PBIS as a framework or a multi-tiered system of support. As I was kind of writing in week 2, I think this is such an interesting conversation because man, that's so hard to I hear so many different people really not have a true understanding of what we mean when we think about positive behavioral interventions and support. And I think it starts with understanding what we mean by a framework and understanding what we mean by a system of like organizing what we do as adults, what we do for kids in schools. So bear with me, quick explanation, but I think it's key that we all have the right information, because then you're gonna be able to combat those folks who say, I don't agree with PBIS because it's tickets and it's rewarding kids and all that stuff. So yeah, anyway, here we go. So again, thinking about a framework, we got to start with this idea of data, systems, and practices and how we use those basically to really get to equitable outcomes for all of our students. And if you read the article that I shared with you guys this week by Megan Cave, she starts to break down like what do these things actually mean. So I thought I'd go real quick and just kind of summarize that as well. So first we talk about equity. Equity exists at the center because it's our priority for schools. We want our schools to work for all kids, no matter what. So we have to have that in the center and really the emphasis of what we do, because we want to make sure that it's, like I said, school works for everyone. We want that to be at safe, physically and emotionally safe and welcoming place for all of our students. So equity is at the center of our work. Then we look at data. So we use data to support decision making, right? And this is what Megan Cave says in her article, and this is really where this is coming from. So data tells us when things are working. Data tells us when things are not. Maybe when we need to start doing something different. We need to make sure that we have the data sources that we need, and then we need to actually use them. I think that's another issue that we run into is we have all this data. You're probably in a school right now that has, I don't know, branching minds or power school or Swiss or anything like that, all these different data sources. And we look at AQuest and we look at NSCAS and we look all these things, but like, how do we actually sit down, go through and look at that data and use it to determine what we're going to do? So having data, making sure that we're using it the right way. Hopefully that data then tells us, here are the practices we should be doing in our school, okay? Practices support student behavior, okay? Or practices support student academics or achievement, right? Specific practices that really create the support that our students need, okay? So an example of a practice would be specific positive feedback. An example of a practice would be flexible grouping in our classrooms, or stating the objective and posting it in the room where everybody can see it. These are all practices that we know work. There's a lot of evidence behind them, and our data is telling us, here's what we need to do. We need to have these practices in place, right? So a practice that supports student behavior. Then a system supports staff behavior in doing those practices, okay? So it's really the nuts and bolts of like how our school operates, like Megan says. So think about our teams, think about our professional development, any type of plans we have, coaching, all that is the system that helps staff do the practices. And I always use this example because I think it's the simplest one out there, is if the practice is specific positive feedback, then the system to support staff in giving that feedback would be like our acknowledgement system, right? So if you're in a school that does like, coins or falcon feathers or cardinal bucks, whatever it is, when we're reinforcing students. Really, all that is a system to support staff in giving feedback, right? System to support the practice of giving positive feedback. That's really all it is. But everybody gets all up in arms about it for some reason. It's kind of crazy. So yeah, so think about it. Again, data kind of tells us, hey, here's what's going on, what's working, what's not, helps us decide here are the practices we want to do, but we have to make sure we have the systems surrounding those practices so we can help staff do them, right? We can't just say, hey, teachers, go do explicit instruction in your classroom and be done with it. We have to have professional development. Preferably, we're having some coaching. We have some teams talking about it. These are all the systems part around it. So data, practices, now systems, all that goes together. And we have this well-oiled machine to achieve specific outcomes that, as Mrs. Cave says in her article, we know are possible. So that's how they all work together for those outcomes we want. I love in that article how she then takes those things, that data, systems, and practices, and really kind of expands them. And we've talked about all these, and these are kind of brought up in our textbook. But think about, the data sources that you have. We kind of referenced it, but also thinking about discipline data and fidelity data. We all use those, and then we determine those practices. And we're going to talk about classroom practices here soon. So like teaching expectations and our procedures and routines. But the place where I feel like we always forget, or we always maybe lack, is the systems around it, which really focus around how do we support staff in doing it. And then the last thing I'll say is we can take this idea of data, systems, and practices and go throughout our triangle, right? So we kind of reference this, but when we think about a PBIS framework, we think about 3 tiers of support based on student need. Tier 1 is what everybody gets. Tier 2 is for kids who need a little bit of extra. And Tier 3 is for students who need intense individualized support. We can take this idea of data, systems, and practices, and I'll basically use that in all that we do. All we're going to do then is increase intensity, frequency, duration, specialization, differentiation, right? So for example, we might collect data a lot more on an individual student getting intensive behavior support than we do for all kids, right? We might give more specific feedback at a frequent rate for individual students who need that support than we do for all kids. We might have behavior intervention plans that last longer than maybe kids who are on a simple tier 2 support. So we're just increasing the use of data, systems, and practices throughout our framework. So that's my short and sweet version of it. Again, I think the key thing is that we have to keep reminding ourselves is that when we talk about PBIS, we're not talking about one thing here. We are talking about a framework for how we do all our things in this multi-tiered system, and just continue to remind ourselves of that. Read that article by Megan Cave. It's amazing, and it really gives you a good sense of where we're at. So hope everything's going well week 2. Reach out if you have questions, but thank you so much for the time. And I will stop recording now.